Hey everyone, don't forget to comment where you're watching from today. What you're about to witness is a story about respect, humility, and how one at-bat taught a cocky young all-star a lesson he'd never forget. The summer air hung heavy over Camden Yards, the kind of evening where baseball legends are born. The Baltimore Orioles were hosting the Seattle Mariners, but this wasn't just any regular season game. This was the night when young shortstop Zane Porter would learn that in baseball, as in life, respect isn't given, it's earned. Cal Ripken Jr. was going through his usual pregame routine, methodical and focused as always. 20 years into his career, and he's still prepared for each game like it was his first. The future Hall of Famer had seen countless young stars come and go, each thinking they were the next big thing. But none had been quite as vocal about it as Zane Porter. Porter had burst onto the scene with the Mariners, a phenomenal talent with a bat and a glove who'd made the All-Star team in just his second season. But his skill was matched only by his arrogance, and he'd developed a reputation for showboating and disrespecting the game's veterans. Blake Summers, calling the game from the broadcast booth, had been watching the tension build all season. "There's something special in the air tonight, folks," his voice carried across the airwaves. Zane Porter has been making waves with his comments about old-school players, and now he's facing one of the greatest to ever play the position. The pregame warm-ups seemed routine enough, but those paying attention could see what was coming. Porter was showing off, making behind-the-back throws to first, flipping his bat during batting practice, playing to the cameras that followed his every move. Wesley Fox, Cal's teammate for the past 5 seasons, watched from the dugout as Porter's antics continued. He'd seen that look in Cal's eyes before, not anger, not frustration, just quiet determination. The kind of look that usually preceded something memorable. Rose Lang, covering the game for the Baltimore Sun, had picked up on the underlying tension. She'd interviewed Porter earlier that day, and his comments had been typically brash. "Ripken's time is over," he'd declared. "The game's evolved. All that consecutive game stuff? That's old news. Baseball needs excitement, needs players who aren't afraid to show some personality." The first sign of trouble came during infield practice. Porter, taking grounders at short, began mimicking Cal's methodical fielding style, drawing laughs from some of his teammates. Cal continued his own preparation, seemingly oblivious to the mockery. Tristan Vaughn, the Orioles' veteran manager, started to walk toward the field, but Cal quietly waved him off. This wasn't about team drama or hurt feelings. This was about something more fundamental: respect for the game itself. The real confrontation came just before the first pitch. Porter, walking past the Orioles' dugout, couldn't resist one more jab. "Hey, Ripken," he called out, loud enough for nearby fans to hear. "Try to keep up tonight. Wouldn't want you pulling something trying to match my range." Cal's response was characteristic, a slight nod, nothing more. But those who knew him, who had played alongside him through the years, recognized what that nod meant. It wasn't acceptance or submission. It was acknowledgement of the challenge, of the moment, of what was about to unfold. Silas Greer, behind home plate, had umpired enough games to sense when something special was brewing. He'd seen the great ones Aaron, Mays, Brett, and he recognized that same quiet intensity in Cal's demeanor. The game began with Porter making an impressive play in the hole, throwing out the Orioles' leadoff man with a jump throw that had become his signature. He posed briefly after the throw, soaking in the mixture of cheers and boos from the Baltimore crowd. In the bottom of the first, Cal stepped into the box for his first at-bat against Seattle's ace. Porter was chattering from shortstop, just loud enough to be heard at the plate. "Keep it in the infield, old man. I'll show you how a real shortstop makes the play." Cal dug in, his stance as familiar to baseball fans as their own reflection. For 20 years, he'd stood in that box, defying time and critics alike. The pitch came in, a sharp grounder to short. Porter fielded it cleanly, made another jumping throw, and celebrated as Cal was called out by a step. "That's how it's done." Porter shouted, loud enough for the dugouts to hear. "The game's passed you by, old-timer." Miles Preston, the baseball commissioner, watching from his box seat, shook his head. He'd seen enough young talents come and go to know that pride often preceded the fall. And Cal Ripken Jr. had made a career of teaching lessons to those who needed them most. The game continued, with Porter making several more flashy plays and taking every opportunity to gesture toward the Orioles' dugout. Each time, Cal's expression remained unchanged, his preparation for each at-bat as meticulous as ever. Wesley Fox knew what was coming. He'd seen it before, the way Cal studied each pitch, each defensive alignment, building a mental database that would prove crucial when the moment arrived. That moment was coming, and Porter had no idea he was writing himself into a story that would be told for years to come. By the 7th inning, Porter's showboating had only increased. He'd made a few more spectacular plays, each followed by more dramatic celebrations. The Seattle dugout seemed split, some players enjoying the show, others looking uncomfortable with their young star's behavior. Nolan Spencer, the Mariners' manager, had tried to calm Porter down between innings, but the young shortstop was riding too high on his own success to listen. "I'm showing up the best shortstop of his generation," Porter had laughed. "This is what the fans come to see." What no one knew then was that the next inning would change everything. Cal would step to the plate with 2 outs, runners on second and third, the Orioles down by 1. And Zane Porter was about to learn why some legends are better left unquestioned. And there you have it, friends. The stage is set for a moment that would remind everyone why respect for the game and its greatest players isn't just about tradition, it's about understanding that true greatness doesn't need to announce itself. Have you ever witnessed someone's arrogance lead to their own downfall? Share your stories in the comments below. And remember, in baseball as in life, how you handle success says more about you than how many successes you have. Stay tuned for what happens next, because Zane Porter is about to learn that some lessons can only be taught by those who've earned the right to teach them. As the 8th inning approached at Camden Yards, the tension in the air was as thick as the summer humidity. What had started as a regular season game had transformed into something more, a clash between baseball's past and present, between respect and showmanship, between Cal Ripken Jr.'s quiet dignity and Zane Porter's brash arrogance. Blake Summers leaned into his microphone in the broadcast booth, his voice carrying decades of baseball wisdom. For those just joining us, young Zane Porter has been putting on quite a show tonight, both with his glove and his attitude. But there's something about the way Cal Ripken is carrying himself. Reminds me of that night in '91 when he faced down that rookie pitcher who'd been running his mouth all week. Down in the Orioles' dugout, Wesley Fox watched Cal methodically prepare for his upcoming at-bat. 20 years in the league and Cal's routine never changed. The same stretches, the same practice swings, the same laser focus that had carried him through 2,632 consecutive games. The Seattle pitcher was tiring, having thrown over 100 pitches. In the Mariners' dugout, Nolan Spencer was on the phone to the bullpen, knowing the next few minutes could decide more than just the game's outcome. Porter couldn't help himself. As Cal stepped into the on-deck circle, the young shortstop called out from his position. "Hey, old-timer. Try to keep it on the ground this time. Give the fans one more chance to see how a real shortstop makes the play." Rose Lang, scribbling notes in the press box, caught the subtle shift in Cal's stance, not tension, but the kind of calm that comes from having seen it all before. She'd covered baseball long enough to know when history was about to be made. Silas Greer, the home plate umpire, found himself remembering another night, years ago, when he'd watched a young Cal Ripken redefine what a shortstop could be. Now, here was Porter, talented but untested, thinking he was rewriting the book Cal had helped write. The moment built slowly, like a summer storm gathering strength. The Orioles had managed to get runners on second and third, but with 2 outs, they were still trailing by a run. The Seattle pitcher, looking increasingly uncertain, kept glancing toward his dugout, hoping for a call to the bullpen that wasn't coming. Miles Preston, watching from his box seat, leaned forward. He'd seen countless games over his years as commissioner, but there was something different about tonight. Something in the air that reminded him why baseball had always been more than just a game. Porter was still chattering, positioning himself deeper than usual, making a show of his preparation. "Better swing hard, old man. Father Time is undefeated, you know." What Porter didn't notice was how the other players on the field had fallen silent. Even his own teammates had stopped responding to his antics. They could feel it too, the weight of the moment, the sense that something memorable was about to unfold. Tristan Vaughn stood at the dugout rail, his weathered face showing just a hint of a smile. He'd managed hundreds of players over his career, but none quite like Cal. He'd seen that look before, not anger, not even determination, but the kind of focused clarity that came from 2 decades of preparation for moments exactly like this. The crowd at Camden Yards had grown unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that falls when everyone present senses they're about to witness something special. Even the vendors had stopped their calls, the only sound the gentle flutter of pennants in the summer breeze. Wesley Fox remembered his first day with the Orioles, how Cal had taken him aside and told him, "This game will teach you everything you need to know about yourself if you're willing to learn." Looking at Porter's continued showboating, Fox wondered what lesson the young shortstop was about to learn. Up in the broadcast booth, Blake Summers was painting the picture for his radio audience. The shadows are lengthening across the infield now, and there's Cal Ripken stepping into the box with that same stance we've seen over 10,000 times. Porter's playing deep at short, still gesturing, still talking, but Cal's just going through his routine, same as he has since rookie ball. Porter made a show of moving a few steps deeper, waving to his outfielders to shift slightly, all with exaggerated gestures meant to draw attention. "Hope those old eyes can still see the signs they're putting down," he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent stadium. But Cal's focus never wavered. He went through his ritual: 3 practice swings, 2 taps of the plate, adjust the batting gloves. The same sequence he'd performed tens of thousands of times, in parks across the country, through summer heat and October chill. Rose Lang's pen flew across her notebook. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Porter, all flash and bravado, playing to the cameras, versus Ripken, embodying the quiet professionalism that had made him the Iron Man of baseball. The first pitch was inside, forcing Cal to back away. Porter immediately began commenting again. "Little too quick for you? Don't worry, plenty more where that came from." Cal simply reset, went through his routine again. Tap tap. 20 years of muscle memory, of preparation for precisely these moments. The Seattle pitcher looked in for his sign, clearly struggling with fatigue but unwilling to give in. In the Mariners' dugout, Nolan Spencer held his breath. He'd seen that look in Cal's eyes before, back when he was still playing himself. It was the look that said a statement was about to be made. Porter was practically dancing at shortstop now, making a show of his preparation for each pitch. "Come on, old-timer. Show us what you got left in the tank." The second pitch missed outside. Ball 2. The crowd's tension ratcheted up another notch. In the on-deck circle, Wesley Fox found himself gripping his bat tighter, feeling the weight of the moment even as a spectator. Silas Greer remained perfectly still behind the plate, his focus absolute. In his 30 years of umpiring, he'd learned to recognize the moments that transcended the game itself. This was one of them. The third pitch caught too much plate, a sharp line drive that just curved foul down the left field line. Porter used the break to continue his performance, making elaborate gestures to his outfielders, playing to the cameras, seeming to revel in his perceived dominance of the moment. What he didn't see was the subtle adjustment Cal made in the box. A slight shift of the back foot, a marginally open stance, the kind of changes only 20 years of experience could teach you to make. Blake Summers' voice crackled with anticipation over the airwaves. "And here we are, folks. 2-1 count, runners on second and third, Orioles down by 1 in the bottom of the 8th. Porter's still putting on a show at short, but there's something about the way Cal's settled in." The fourth pitch was coming, and with it, a moment that would be remembered long after the final score was forgotten. Baseball had a way of teaching its lessons with perfect poetry, and tonight's lesson was about to be delivered by one of its greatest professors. And there you have it, friends. The stage is set, the tension is building, and a young star is about to learn why some legends are earned through more than just talent. Have you ever witnessed a moment when experience and wisdom overcame youth and arrogance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned, because what happens next will remind everyone why respect in baseball, as in life, isn't given, it's earned through years of quiet excellence and unwavering dedication. The fourth pitch was a fastball, high and tight. Cal leaned back slightly, unfazed, while Porter seized the opportunity for more theatrics. Getting a little close to those ancient reflexes, isn't it? He called out, his voice echoing in the unusually quiet stadium. Blake Summers' voice carried the gravity of the moment to listeners across the country. 3 balls, 1 strike. Cal Ripken Jr. at the plate, a man who's seen just about everything baseball can throw at a player. Zane Porter at shortstop, still putting on a show, still not realizing he might be writing himself into a story he won't want to remember. The Seattle pitcher stepped off the mound, buying time, perhaps sensing the weight of what was unfolding. In the Orioles' dugout, Tristan Vaughn watched Cal's unwavering focus, remembering countless other nights when the Iron Man had turned tension into teaching moments. Porter was practically strutting now, moving a few steps to his right, making an elaborate show of preparing for what he assumed would be a pull hit from an aging veteran. "Don't worry, old-timer," he shouted, loud enough for the front-row fans to hear clearly. "I'll try to make this look good for the highlight reel." What Porter didn't notice was the subtle shift in his teammates' body language. The Mariners' center fielder had taken a small step toward left, adjusting based on 2 decades of data about Cal's hitting tendencies rather than Porter's theatrical positioning. Wesley Fox couldn't help but smile from the on-deck circle. He'd seen that look in Cal's eyes before, not anger, not even determination, but pure, distilled focus. The kind that came from having played this game longer than Porter had been alive. The 5th pitch was a slider that broke late, diving toward the outside corner. Cal watched it pass. Ball 4. But instead of taking his base, he held up his hand to Silas Greer behind the plate. An unusual move for a man known for his straightforward approach to the game. Rose Lang leaned forward in the press box, her pen hovering over her notebook. In 20 years of covering baseball, she'd never seen Cal call time in a situation like this. Something was coming. Something worth documenting. As Cal stepped out of the box, he did something else out of character. He looked directly at Porter and nodded. Just once. A simple gesture that carried 2 decades of weight behind it. Porter, caught off guard by the unexpected acknowledgement, faltered in his performance for just a moment. "And Cal Ripken Jr. has called time," Blake Summers announced, his voice carrying a hint of anticipation. "In all my years of watching him play, I've rarely seen him interrupt his own at-bat. There's something in the air tonight, folks. Something that reminds me of those special moments when baseball transcends itself." Cal went through his routine again, but with a subtle difference that only the most veteran observers noticed. His back foot was slightly adjusted, his hands a fraction higher on the bat. Small changes that spoke volumes to those who had watched him evolve over 20 years in the major leagues. Porter, perhaps sensing the shift in atmosphere, tried to regain control of the moment. "What's wrong, old man? Need a breather? Maybe a nap?" But his voice had lost some of its certainty, the bravado feeling forced now rather than natural. The Seattle pitcher looked in for his sign, shook off 2 before nodding. The runners at second and third took their leads. The crowd at Camden Yards collectively held its breath. 20 years of baseball history hung in the summer air. "Full count now," Blake Summers intoned, his broadcaster's objectivity tinged with anticipation. Cal Ripken Jr., who's faced this pitcher 37 times in his career, who's seen this situation thousands of times, who's taught more lessons about this game than most players will ever learn. The pitch came a fastball, belt high, tailing toward the outside corner. The kind of pitch that had ended countless at-bats over countless summers. Porter was already moving to his left, anticipating a veteran's attempt to go with the pitch. What happened next would be talked about in baseball circles for years to come. Cal's swing was textbook perfect, the same swing he'd honed over 20 years, over 3,000 hits, over 2,632 consecutive games. The sound of bat meeting ball echoed through the stadium like a thunderclap. Porter had just enough time to realize his mistake. The ball wasn't going to his left. It wasn't a veteran trying to go with the pitch. It was a line drive rocket, heading directly where he had been standing before his theatrical repositioning. "There's a shot." Blake Summers' voice rose with the moment. "Hit right where Porter was supposed to be. But he's out of position, trying to recover." The ball screamed past Porter's desperately lunging glove, splitting the gap he'd created with his showboating. Both runners scored easily as the ball rolled to the wall. Cal, running with the same methodical purpose that had defined his career, pulled into second base standing up. The roar from the Camden Yards crowd was deafening. Porter stood there, hands on his hips, as his teammates jogged back to their positions, carefully avoiding his gaze. The lesson had been delivered with surgical precision. Rose Lang was already typing furiously. In one swing, Cal Ripken Jr. reminded everyone why baseball's most important lessons are taught not through words, but through actions. The young star who had spent the night mocking a legend had just been educated by one. As Cal stood on second base, adjusting his batting gloves with the same careful attention he'd shown for 20 years, he finally looked at Porter again. No smile, no gesture, no visible celebration. Just the quiet confidence of a man who had let his actions speak for him. Wesley Fox, watching from the on-deck circle, saw Porter's face flush red as the realization hit him. The young shortstop had just been taught a masterclass in baseball humility, delivered by one of the game's greatest professors. Miles Preston, the baseball commissioner, stood and applauded with the rest of the crowd. This was why baseball remained the national pastime, its ability to teach life's lessons through 9 innings and 90 feet. In the Mariners' dugout, Nolan Spencer shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He tried to warn Porter about respecting the game's legends. Sometimes lessons had to be learned the hard way. The stadium scoreboard replayed the hit, showing Porter's exaggerated pre-pitch positioning and his futile dive for the ball. But it also showed something else, Cal's perfect swing, unchanged after 20 years, delivering exactly the kind of hit that Porter's showboating had made possible. Tristan Vaughn turned to his bench coach and murmured, "That's why he's Cal Ripken Jr. He doesn't need to tell you he's great. He just shows you." Blake Summers summarized the moment for his radio audience. "And there it is, folks. Cal Ripken Jr. has just turned this game around with a 2-run double, but he's taught an even more important lesson in the process. Baseball has a way of humbling those who need humbling, and tonight, that lesson was delivered by one of its greatest teachers." Porter spent the rest of the inning unusually quiet, his earlier bravado replaced by a thoughtful silence. Every player in both dugouts knew they had just witnessed something special, not just a crucial hit in a baseball game, but a moment that encapsulated why the sport had endured for over a century. As the teams changed sides, Cal jogged past Porter on his way to his position at shortstop. This time, it was Porter who nodded first, a gesture of acknowledgement that carried the weight of a lesson learned. And there you have it, friends. Sometimes the greatest statements are made without a word being spoken. Have you ever witnessed a moment when actions spoke louder than words? When someone's arrogance was answered not with anger, but with excellence? Share your stories in the comments below. Remember, in baseball as in life, true greatness doesn't need to announce itself. It simply shows up, does the job, and lets the results speak for themselves. Stay tuned for what happens next, because this night at Camden Yards isn't over yet, and some lessons take more than one inning to fully sink in. 1 year later, on a warm evening at Camden Yards, Rose Lang sat in the press box finishing an article about how a single at-bat had changed not just a game, but a young player's entire approach to baseball. The story of Cal Ripken Jr.'s lesson to Zane Porter had become part of baseball lore, but what happened after that night proved even more compelling. The immediate aftermath of that famous double had been just the beginning. Porter's demeanor for the rest of that game had been noticeably different. Gone were the theatrical gestures, the showboating, the constant commentary. In their place was something that looked remarkably like reflection. Blake Summers, who had called that memorable game, still kept the scorecard framed in his booth. "You know," he told his listeners now, "sometimes baseball has a way of delivering exactly the lesson that needs to be learned." What happened that night wasn't just about a veteran player schooling a rookie, it was about the game itself teaching one of its timeless truths. The Orioles had won that night, 4-2, but the real victory had been written in Porter's face as he left the field. Wesley Fox remembered seeing the young shortstop lingering in the dugout after the final out, watching Cal's post-game routine with new eyes. What nobody expected was what happened next. Porter had waited by the Orioles clubhouse, still in his uniform, still processing the events of the night. When Cal emerged, Porter did something that surprised everyone present. He asked for 5 minutes of the veteran's time. "I've been around baseball my whole life," Tristan Vaughn later recalled, "but I've never seen a lesson sink in quite that quickly or quite that deeply." That's the thing about Cal, he never needed to embarrass anyone to make his point. He just showed them a better way to play the game. The conversation between Cal and Porter lasted more than 5 minutes. Nobody knows exactly what was said, but those who passed by caught fragments about respect, about preparation, about understanding that baseball was bigger than any individual player. Miles Preston, who had witnessed the entire sequence of events, saw it as a perfect example of why baseball remained America's pastime. "The game has a way of policing itself," he explained. "Sometimes it uses statistics, sometimes it uses moments, but it always finds a way to teach the lessons that need teaching." Porter's transformation didn't happen overnight, but the change was unmistakable. In his next series at Camden Yards, there was no showboating, no theatrical gestures, no attempts to mock or intimidate. Instead, there was something that looked remarkably like the professional focus he had once mocked in Cal. The interesting thing, Rose Lang wrote in her follow-up piece, wasn't that Porter stopped being flashy. It was that he learned to let his play speak for itself. The talent that had made him an all-star was still there, but now it was accompanied by something else: respect for the game and those who had helped build it. A month after that fateful night, Porter did something else unexpected. He reached out to Cal through mutual connections and asked if they could meet during the off-season. Cal, true to his character, agreed without hesitation. That winter, baseball insiders started hearing stories about Porter showing up at Cal's baseball clinic, not as a guest instructor, but as a student. The young all-star who had once mocked the legend was now taking notes on everything from fielding techniques to pre-game preparation. Wesley Fox, who attended one of those sessions, couldn't help but smile at the transformation. You know what the really amazing thing was? Cal never once mentioned that night. Never held it over Zane's head. He just taught, and Zane just learned. That's what real legends do. They make the game better for everyone. The next season, baseball writers began noting a change in Porter's interviews. Gone were the boastful predictions and dismissive comments about veterans. In their place were thoughtful discussions about the game, about preparation, about respecting both opponents and history. "I had it all wrong," Porter admitted in a candid interview with Rose Lang. "I thought being great meant making sure everyone knew how great you were. Cal showed me that real greatness is about making everyone around you better. It's about respecting the game more than your own ego." Blake Summers watched Porter's evolution with particular interest. "You know what the most remarkable thing is?" he told his listeners. "Porter's actually become a better player. His talent was never in question, but now it's refined, focused. He's learned that flash without substance is just distraction." The statistics backed up that observation. Porter's fielding percentage improved, his batting average rose, and most tellingly, his teammates began describing him as a leader in the clubhouse. The very veterans he had once dismissed became his mentors, his resources for understanding the game's deeper nuances. Silas Greer, who had umpired that pivotal game, saw Porter at a charity event the following year. "The transformation wasn't just in how he played," Greer recalled. "It was in how he carried himself. He'd learned what Cal had been showing us for 20 years. That confidence doesn't need an audience." Cal himself rarely discussed that night, but when asked about Porter's evolution, his response was characteristic. "Baseball has a way of teaching you exactly what you need to learn, exactly when you need to learn it. Sometimes you're the student, sometimes you're the teacher, but the game is always the real professor." The story became a favorite among baseball coaches at all levels. It wasn't just about a rookie learning respect. It was about how baseball's greatest lessons often came wrapped in moments of humility. Porter began holding his own youth clinics, teaching not just baseball skills but the importance of respecting the game and its history. He kept a photo from that famous night in his locker, not of the double that had taught him his lesson, but of his conversation with Cal afterward. That wasn't just a veteran teaching a rookie a lesson, Tristan Vaughn reflected. That was baseball reminding us why it survived for over a century. The game is bigger than any player, any moment, any stat. It's about passing down not just skills, but values. A year after that pivotal night, Porter returned to Camden Yards as an all-star again, but with a different attitude. Before the game, he spent time signing autographs for kids, sharing stories about learning from veterans, embodying the very principles he had once mocked. During batting practice, he worked methodically through his routine, a routine that looked remarkably similar to the one he had once ridiculed. Some of the veteran players noticed that he had even adopted Cal's habit of studying opposing pitchers during their warm-ups. The beautiful thing about baseball, Miles Preston observed, is that its lessons don't just make you a better player, they make you a better person. Porter learned more than just how to position himself at shortstop that night. He learned why the game has endured for generations. And there you have it, friends. A story that began with mockery ended with mentorship. A moment of humility became a lifetime of learning. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed your perspective? A lesson that made you see everything differently? Share your stories in the comments below. Remember, in baseball as in life, the loudest statement is often a quiet example. The greatest teachers don't need to prove their greatness. They simply show others the path to finding their own. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about the moments that remind us why baseball will always be more than just a game. Because sometimes the most important home runs aren't the ones that clear the fence, they're the moments that clear our minds of arrogance and open our hearts to learning.